I'm very honored to participate once more in this conference and to have the chance to present again on Igor Zabel's exhibition Legacy. 2 years ago at the Symposium exhibiting in Slovenia II during the Q&A, after my presentation titled The Curator's Rooms, I have a vague memory of a question from Betty Jevroj, drawing a direct line between inexplicable presence, curator's working place, which was the focus of my talk, and individual systems, which will be the focus of this talk. As two exhibitions where Igor Zabel best achieved his own curatorial vision, these words are my words. I do not remember how I answered, and it doesn't really matter. What matters is that I set myself up looking to prove Betty's hypothesis, and that in this looking, what I found was a new context to better understand Zabel's curatorial career. The title of this presentation is An Individual and a System. Every other year, more or less, around the time when the International Exhibition of Contemporary Art, better known as the Venice Biennale, opens in Venice, that city is flooded with a particular type of people: artists, curators, gallerists, museum directors, exhibition organizers, critics, collectors, and everyone else who would like to become part of this world, as well as a whole group of people who have some more or less vague connection with contemporary art. Venice is not just an exhibition of contemporary artworks, it is also especially an exhibition or presentation of the art system itself, which condensed into a few days in the limited space of its picturesque and theatrical venues, displays itself in its multi-layered and contradictory nature in its most unpalatable aspect and loftiest achievements. Here you can get a clear idea about the working of the complex system we call the contemporary art world. This is how Igor Zabel described the Venice Biennale in his 2001 column entitled The Soil from Which Art Grows. An apt description, but unaware of the fact that just 2 years later, he would find himself at the very center of it all. The 2 year passed, and in 2003, Francesco Bonami, the artistic director of the 50th Venice Biennale titled Dreams and Conflict, the Dictatorship of the Viewer, offers, and I quote, complete autonomy to 10 curators to realize their visions, unquote, that would comprise the Central International Art Exhibition. One of these curators was Igor Zabel with his exhibition Individual Systems. In his catalog essay, Bonami heavily leaned on the previous biennial, curated by Aurad Zeman, The Plateau of Mankind, claiming difference. As Bonami insists, Dreams and Conflict announced the end of, and I quote, the golden age of the grand curator, an age that Zeman had opened in the late 1960s, unquote. With the dismissal of the grand curator, Bonami declares the importance to reimagine, and I quote, the 20th century of the grand show, such as the biennial and documenta, developed for the single perspective of the curator/author. When it ended, my generation was forced to conceive of a new exhibition structure and curatorial practice that could address identity of the future of the grand show, unquote. His generation indeed placed their hope in a new curatorial model for large-scale events that sought polyphony, in which authority is at best divided and delegated among many voices. This invitational structure was not unique to Bonami's biennial. Without going too far into a typology of curatorial teams, exemplified best by Okwena Wazer's 2002 document 11, or endless curatorial delegation. Here I'm thinking of Giancarlo Piliti's first Tirana biennial in 2001, where Francesco Bonami was one of the more than 35 invited curator. I would rather like to stay in Venice and invoke Aperto 93. The Aperto section of the Venice Biennial was introduced by Achille Bonito Oliva and Arad Zeman in 1980 as the open section for young international artists. What would become the last iteration of the Aperto section, Aperto 93, took place during Bonito's Oliva transnational fantasy for the 1993 Venice Biennial, organized by Elena Kontova. She invited her fellow Flash Arts editors and contributors to curate distinct exhibition within the Arsenale. This final iteration of the Aperto section, which was increasingly gathering more and more attention, even more than both of the central exhibition as well as the National Pavilion, was nicknamed in 1993 the Better Biennial. One of these critic turned curators was Francesco Bonami, who recalls it as the start of his curatorial journey. A decade later, Bonami reproduced the same invitational structure, this time expanding it to the whole international art exhibition, extending an invitation that he himself received a decade prior, creating a vast exhibition of exhibitions, a said future for the grand show. The critics were unanimous. They condemned the biennial as unbearably dense, packed with too many works. The critics renamed it, and I quote, the dictatorship of the curator, unquote. Bonami's response to those critics was to explain Bonami's response was to explain the critics' disapproval, claiming that they were in fact reacting to the loss of their own power as critics as the role of the curator was rising to stardom. In what I think we can only understand as a critical gesture, Piotr Ukransky's contribution to the biennial outdoor section interlude was a red banner on which the black silhouettes of the 11 curators were enumerated. Compositionally, the curators are detached from one another, positioned in the individual autonomy granted to them by Bonami's invitation. This image allows us to further the reading of the 2003 biennial as the biennial of curators, so much so that they are themselves becoming its subject. And with the biennial logo at the left end, just next to Zabel's silhouette, the curators become branded advertisement for the biennial, clearly in sight from the Vaporetto on your way in the floating city. Standing the proudest and tallest, Bonami's silhouette reminds us that despite his wishes of horizontal authorial delegation, his posture grows bigger with each invited curator and their invited artist. He becomes the curator of curators, curating artists, and if I may say, the grandeur curator. Bonami's reliance on curatorial invitation as a strategy marks the peak of an era of transformation of the curator's position in contemporary art. This era consisted of the rise of the cult of the star curator, which acquired an unprecedented mobility through the biennalization of the art world, fueled by the unstoppable globalism of both the world economic system as well as the art system, an art system which could no longer ignore what was outside the fortress of the former West. This is the same system in which Igor Zabel's recognition as an international curatorial figure was taking shape. After coordinating Manifesta 3 in Ljubljana in the year 2000, where I must note Francesco Bonami was part of the team of the 4 curators, Zabel was included within the ICI's important curatorial survey publication, Words of Wisdom, a curator's vademecum on contemporary art 2001, as well as the 2 prestigious Phaidons publication, Vitamin P, New Perspective in Painting, 2002, and Cream 3, Contemporary Art in Culture, 2003. The sequence of Zabel's international curatorial recognition culminated with Bonami's inviting him to curate in Venice. Zabel's response to this invitation was his exhibition, Individual Systems. In 2003, in the 2003 Venice Biennale catalog and Zabel's exhibition essay, we can read his intention for his section, and I quote, "The individual systems project is an attempt, fragmentary and uncertain as it surely is, to answer the dilemma about how art is still possible, how can a clear-cut decision be achieved, and how can the concept of artistic autonomy and modernity becomes the basis for it," unquote. To quote Zabel again, in a transcript of a lecture which was published in the book Ready to Change in 2005, and I quote, "In brief, the theme of the exhibition was those artists who shaped specific system and procedures through their work, artists who penetrate into the already existing social systems in their own ingenious and specific way and shape up their own world within them," unquote. Zabel's exhibition was noted by some critics as an exception within Bonami's biennial. In Betty Gevroch's words from the 2018 documentary, The Curator's Room, Igor Zabel, How to Make Art Visible, and I quote, "His individual system exhibition was within the whole biennial a very special, quiet, poetic space. Anyone could see that it had Igor's special touch all over," unquote. The quietness of Zabel's exhibition mean that, in Charles Esch's word from the same documentary, and I quote, "Somehow this exhibition got lost within the cacophony of spectacle that was present in other curatorial suggestions, and this quietness of individual system found it difficult to compete in the mess that is the Venice Biennale," unquote. In 2008, Esche and Maria Alvahova, who was also within the curatorial team of Manifesto 3 alongside Bonami, organized the exhibition Once is Nothing as a response to an invitation from the first Brussels Biennial. The two institutional curators took the opportunity to reflect on Zabel's individual system. To do so, they asked Joseph Tabernig, who designed the original exhibition architecture and who also was one of the exhibiting artists in Zabel's project, to reimagine and adapt the spatial architecture of individual systems to its new space in Brussels. Without attempting the repetition of re-exhibiting the original artworks, the curators offered a free publication as a way to imagine individual system, an attempt to bridge both time and space. Once is Nothing asked, can exhibitions themselves serve as mnemonic models? And here I'm interested in interpreting Once is Nothing as a grieving exhibition. In a Freudian sense, one's labor of grief involves removing their former libidinal investment from the loved object with the hope of being able to form a new bound. Once is Nothing leaves out the artworks that Zabel loved so much. It knows that it can't bring back the original experience. It does not even pretend to do so. What it does is that it confronts us to a physical absence, a displaced exhibition architecture without its artworks, and our only tool being a mnemonic publication. Once is Nothing offers us a space to project in, whether a pre-existing memory of individual system or even to invent one of our own. I must admit that I also left out the artworks again from my presentation. I rather wanted to better understand the curatorial landscape in which Zabel was moving through. I didn't even pretend to get close to the works. It was partly to prevent emulation and mainly to allow myself to continue to project in Zabel a curatorial model capable of interrogating the figure of the curator, its responsibility, and its authorship at any given scale. To return to Betty's question from 2 years ago, I would like to answer, thank you for the question. I'll think about it for 2 years. But really, I think that what links those two exhibitions, outside of the fact that they were among the few exhibitions in which Zabel didn't carry the responsibility of representing the Moderna Galleria, only carried the responsibility for his own personal obsessions. It was that those two exhibitions shared in maybe its best form his great desire to encounter the art itself, created on two different and almost contradictory scales, but both working with the hope of taking time to concentrate on nothing but the artworks. To extend this answer and to conclude, I would like to share an excerpt from an interview of Zabel after curating what will be his last exhibition, the 2005 Slovene Pavilion in Venice.
One question more, please. The Biennale is one of the biggest art world kermesse. Do you think that art is existing just because of this particular context, or it can obtain good result in other ways, out of the usual spectacular ways?
I think that it is like this, that we have that art can exist in many different contexts, and sometimes even it can be more energetic and more sincere and more powerful outside this sort of big events. I don't think that. I think that this sort of big sorts of events are important also for many reasons. But it's good to have all this context around, and I think that yes, that it can definitely exist, and sometimes in a much better way outside it.
Oh. Returning to the text which I opened this lecture with, The Soil from Which Art Grows, a text preceding his experience within the Arsenale, I find a question and an answer that I believe would still be accurate if asked again after individual system, and I quote Zabel. Sometimes observing all the commotion and discord of the art world, which seems at times to hover somewhere in its own illusionary reality, remote from ordinary life, I ask myself if it makes any sense at all to be part of it. And I always tell myself that it does. Thank you.